Journalists brought us the stories about state capture, but this time around, South African media is due to be part of a new inquiry, this time into themselves. And this is what SANEF Executive Director Kate Skinner had to say about it.
What we're going to look at is ethics, credibility, and specifically the issue of capture of journalists. Capture by the state and capture by corporate interests.
South African media has again come under fire with a call for state security to probe journalists who uncovered alleged irregularities in the disbursement of lottery monies. The call was made by the chairperson of the National Lotto Commission, Professor Alfred Nevutanda. This after an article by ground-up freelance journalist Raymond Joseph about alleged irregularities in the disbursement of lotto monies. The South African National Editors Forum has expressed alarm at the call, but also announced the establishment of a commission to probe whether journalists are captured, believe it or not. The SANEF announcement comes amid perceptions that the mainstream media is biased, and the economic freedom fighter Julius Malema recently attacked the media for failing to follow up on his party's allegations against Minister Pravin Gordhan's daughter's financial interests.
I want the EFF leadership from today and the membership to know we are not answering any question from Tiso Black Stars, Daily Maverick, and Scorpios and ETV, which ask us about our wives, about our relatives, about anyone we know, until they ask Pravin these questions in a live interview.
One would say democracy is not for sissies, but we've got to work hard to make sure that it works. And the question is the media in South Africa doing its job without fear or favor, or does it need to introspect? And to answer these questions, I'm joined by a colleague live from Cape Town, Raymond Joseph.
Hi.
And Raymond Joseph is the author of the article that upset the National Lottery Commission. In the Joburg studios, we have veteran journalist Mathatha Tsedu, and welcomes Chris Louw from the South African National Editors Forum. So the team is complete. You are all equipped, confident journalists who hopefully are not captured.
Absolutely.
Let's start first with what Kate said earlier on there about ethics. That statement, what does it mean actually, that the ethical conduct of journalists needs to be probed?
I think in a time where the media has seen immense change over the last 10 to 15 years, with online media becoming prevalent and the ability to publish information without real ethics and without real guidelines, we can understand that there would be room for journalists to become captured, for journalists to do things that they shouldn't. I think it's very important to distinguish between a journalist making a mistake, getting someone's name wrong, getting a number wrong, and actually being captured and having some sort of agenda in their reporting. And that is the most dangerous thing that we can face as the media, because as we've seen over the last few months, without credibility, we have nothing.
But tell me, Chris, I mean, when you sit in those meetings of SANEF, right, and you look at each other as editors and you discuss these issues, do you always ask one another, are you captured or not? Or do you suspect that one or two amongst yourselves might be?
I think that's a very important point, because often, the media can come across as not looking to each other, always looking outward and pointing a finger outward and going, well, you're the problem, we're the solution, and that's kind of how it's worked for so long, and that's how we want it to keep working. But I do think that in the times that we find ourselves in today, it is time for some introspection. It's time to ask ourselves questions around how we produce content, what we find in terms of the facts that we find, or what we manufacture and what we don't manufacture. And thankfully, there isn't too much of that. I think it's also important to understand that the few journalists amongst us that have proven to be captured, we all know about them and we all know who they are. Maybe there are a few more, and hopefully we can find out who and when and how and find out the details of that. But I do think that the media does hold itself accountable for the most part, in most cases.
Well, let me ask this question then to you, Raymond, in Cape Town, because in your case, a direct reference was made to your article by the chairperson of the Board of National Lotteries Commission, Professor Alfred Nebutanda, and has also gone on to ask the State Security Agency to investigate journalists and basically to investigate you. How do you feel about that?
Bizarre, Tim, absolutely bizarre. So just very briefly, the background to the story is I'm part of a group of 60 journalists around the world who've been investigating lotteries in their own countries. And I think one of the problems, so the information that we've had has come via DSD, Department of Social Development, off the lottery's own website, and through CIPC. We've been doing investigative journalism, and we've been at it for 18 months, and slowly but surely we've been unpacking looting that's going on in the lottery, Tim. And, you know, it's a case of shooting the messenger. We expose corruption and we bring proof, and what they do is they defame us and they call in state security. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre.
Well, I will be asking the panelists who are here in Joburg for their comment on this call by the government in a moment, but I want to hear from you, Mathatha Tsedu. I mean, the media has always had challenges. It's not new. It happened in the apartheid days, just after that, and up to now. So one wonders why there's sudden concern about the ongoing accusations, criticism of the media, to the extent of calling for a probe into the ethical conduct of journalists and media houses.
Well, thanks, Tim. If we take the last point that you're bringing about these probe that is going to happen, led by SANEF through the Press Council, that followed specifically the issue around the Sunday Times. And when the editor of the Sunday Times apologized for some stories that had been written and went further to even say the awards that had been won were going to be taken back, and the money that had been given to those journalists, the Sunday Times itself will take money from its own pockets and give it back to the award managers. And that raised the question, what else went wrong here? And because people feel that the media, journalists, editors want to be referee and player at the same time, the decision was then taken by SANEF in conjunction with the Press Council that this probe must happen, which will be led by a former Constitutional Court judge with a number of other panelists to get to the root of this problem. How far has ethics been compromised in the South African media?
So, but that suggests probably a lapse on the ethical front by the organization itself, right? Or the individuals. Because what do you do? I mean, if you have editorial policies, one takes for granted that journalists are trained anyway, and therefore any media house worth its salt will go out of its way to make sure that people who are employed as journalists, specifically political journalists, are grounded in the ethics of the organization concerned.
Yeah, that's true. And in the particular instance that we're talking about that triggered this investigation, one of those journalists, Hofstadter, said that they cut corners because there was so much pressure on them to produce page one lead stories. And as a result, they did things that they ought not to have done. So you can see that, firstly, from the side of journalists, they allowed themselves to cut corners. And secondly, even if a journalist cuts corners, a story that appears in a newspaper goes through at the very least 7 hands before it hits the streets. So along that path, other lapses would have happened. And this investigation that SANEF is bringing about, it's supposed to go into those things and then draw lessons that must then guide journalism going forward.
Well, many journalists would say, you know, we are told by editors that we must squeeze the story until it screams a headline that will sell the newspapers. And maybe that is the problem. But Chris, let me step back to the request by the chairperson of the Lotteries Board that journalists, or a journalist in this case, Raymond Joseph, be probed by state security agency?
I think that's quite a Trumpian statement to make, and I think we live in an environment where these types of things are happening more and more. Excuse me, and it's simply a case of what we're seeing is when someone doesn't like something being reported about them, they say that either the journalist is captured or the publication is captured, or they send state security after you because apparently journalists have become hackers now. I've never met a hacking journalist in my life. Maybe, Ray, you can teach me a thing or two. But we have to understand that there is there's a reality here that people need to start understanding how journalism functions in order for them to understand what comes out on the other end. And that's part of this inquiry as well, is to open our doors and to say, well, you want to come see what we do? Here it is. And this is how we function, because I think that's so important. Journalism often gets misconstrued you know, in my view, it's a calling, right? So because I'm a journalist, it's easy for me to say that, right? It's in my blood. It's what I feel. I believe in the truth, and I try and always find the truth. And I think it takes a step beyond just working in finance or working in many other industries. And I think it's time for journalists to start showing people that again, and try and get us out of this post-truth era where anything goes, as long as the person who's saying it believes it. If he can make his followers believe it, and we see this in many countries around the world now, then it becomes the truth. And that is a very dangerous position.
But you know, in the world, especially the traditions that we follow, which are in the English-speaking world in the main, right, in the UK and the United States, that the media houses and publications specifically take a particular political view on things, and they say so. So in South Africa, I doubt that we do that, but to what extent, Raymond, do you think that particular editorial stance informs and influences the way certain news stories are covered?
So, Tim, I'm old enough to remember spies in the newsroom, and I'm old enough to remember before a general election, a few days before, the editor would write a leader, declare the paper's colours, and tell people who to vote for. You know, individual journalists, as far as the stories they've done, I don't think. I think it comes across where it's the politics of the paper, it's the politics of the editor. You know, the editor might not always be right, but the editor's always the editor. And ultimately, they define the paper themselves. But as far as instructing individual journalists about how to write their stories and what to put in and what to leave out, I've not seen that happening. It just doesn't happen. Journalism does not function like that. You know, and a conspiracy in a newsroom, the one place where you can't have a conspiracy is in a newsroom where people don't shut up, they talk about it. And there would pretty quickly be a rebellion if journalists are being told what to do. In the newsrooms I've worked in, certainly.
Well, but, you know, I mean, the accusations are that there is now so-called checkbook journalism, and that journalists have been taking money to push a particular line of thinking in the stories that they report on. And I'm not sure to what extent in the instance of the Sunday Times this was the case. And I'm adding to that question, Mathatha Tsedu, the fact that the EFF mentioned specific names of journalists and said that from their point of view, those journalists are pursuing an ideological agenda against themselves, even implying or suggesting that they may be on someone else's payroll to do that.
No, I think the basic position has to be that if the EFF wants to run a media organization, they should start one and publish themselves. But otherwise, they should allow journalists to use their editorial judgment to decide whether what they are saying is a story or not. The fact that they believe that this information that they are putting out is a story does not necessarily mean it is a story. How many press releases land at the inbox of a news editor every day and never see the light of day? So from what Julius was saying there, it's almost as if because we have said it, it is therefore news, and you must publish it. And beyond that, probably you must publish it on page 1 and for the whole week. So where is this thing going to end? If they believe in media freedom, they should allow journalists to use their editorial judgments in deciding what is a story and what is not a story. Now, on the issue of Ray having hacked into the national lotteries, I'm surprised, Ray, that you hack and just take information and not the millions themselves. But what is interesting in Nebuthanda's accusation is that he is not denying the factual nature of the information published. He is saying that that information comes from his computer, which was hacked.
Which confirms then what is being published.
The story is correct. So, insofar as journalism is concerned, that is what should really be the question. Did Ray write something that was untrue? According to Nebuthanda, no. Ray wrote the truth. It's just that it is an inconvenient truth for Nebuthanda.
It's so true that it seems like a computer was hacked, right?
Yeah, but so as I said, a lot of the information was in the public domain. So, Tim, for example, the lottery every year in its annual reports publishes all the recipients of grants. And it's quite opaque. It's in PDFs. And we built a very simple tool that took 16 years worth of grants and made them keyword searchable. And suddenly you could really look at this thing properly. And they've complained about that tool. That information comes off their own website. We got information from the Department of Social Development. We got information from CRPC in the public domain. It took a lot of work, but we got it. Tim, what is happening here is because they don't like the message, and the NLC, the National Lotteries Commission, has been good at it. We've published numerous stories, and every time we publish, what they do is they issue statements, some of them quite defamatory, attacking us, but not dealing with the facts. You know, shoot the messenger. As Mathatha said, inconvenient truth.
Well, I noticed recently on social media, at least, that some old friends in the media, journalists, seasoned journalists, said that we're having a go at each other when Jacques Paul published the address of Julius Malema's home, or the wife's home, and that became a serious exchange of spat between himself, Jacques Paul, and Martin Velds of Nosewick. Now, Chris, tell me, what did you make of that? I mean, where do you draw the line? Because the feeling there, the sense was that he had pushed the boundaries too far.
I think the last thing the media can afford right now is to air their dirty laundry in public. That's not what we're here for. It's not what we do, and it's not our vocation. I think the Poe's decision to do what he did was highly flawed, and I think he's come to realize that, hopefully. As SANEF, we did request that is removed. As you know, based on that clip that you played earlier, there are some real threats being made, and obviously a lot of it is political rhetoric, but the question remains, when is it going to spill over into something very real? Yeah. I think the spats on Twitter, in my opinion, are somewhat childish. I think we all need to just remember why we're here and what we're here to do.
But then, you know, the thing, I understand that. And Mathatha, again, you can add to what Chris has said. It goes on. People now refer to certain journalists as stratcom, and including those that if by accident or on a different occasion they make a particular remark about the developments, then they get labeled stratcom, even by members of the public.
I think just to add on that, where we need to be very mindful, and this is also true of fake news, is that there is a unification around calling people stratcom. There's a unification around producing fake news and making people believe the wrong thing. The last thing we as the media can afford is to not be unified in what we are trying to do. Regardless of which publication you work for, which business you work for, we have to be unified and maintain the standards that we have lived by within the media space for a really long time.
Mathatha?
I think a different way of looking at it is also to accept that the fact that Martin and Jacques had a go at each other, demystifies this notion that the media is this monolithic, one tunnel vision, a group of people who sit in some pub and plot how things are going to be reported, which is all a fallacy. People need to be able to differ, and it's okay, because the fact that you're a journalist doesn't then make you something that is similar to every journalist. We're still individuals with our own thoughts. The manner in which we approach things is defined by many things, including who we are, where we come from, how we were brought up. All that social milieu defines you. And it cannot be that I'm always going to be agreeing.
Well, and there's a bigger challenge. I think that we started there in your opening remark, or earlier remarks, Chris, at least, that the audience, readers, viewers, are also challenged to make up their minds when they are presented with a diverse range of facts and stories, to tell the truth from disinformation or lies, right? So I'm not sure what this probe is going to achieve in that regard, if the public themselves are not aware or are not familiar with how the media works and how to tell the truth from falsehood.
I think if anything, the introspection has a role to serve within, or as a purpose within the media, but I think it has a greater purpose, and that purpose is to our audiences, to our readers, to our viewers, and that is also to try and make them understand how we work, how we function. I think too often we are not, and this isn't necessarily our job, but being transparent in what we do and inviting people into our processes and our thinking and our ways of trying to understand the world, which is somewhat different, like I said earlier, to most other industries out there.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important for us to not just view this as, okay, well, we're going to get a bunch of people to sit around a table that all work in the media, have a judge and a few other panelists, and then we're going to all just, sort of figure it out ourselves. I think it needs to be a very transparent process. And fortunately, these days, we have technology to make that a lot easier. Things like live streaming, a panel discussion between people around what happened at the Sunday Times, I think would be a perfect way to get people to believe the right things.
Well, Raymond, what's your contribution to this point of helping the public, the audiences, to understand how the media works, especially now in the day of fake news, disinformation, falsehoods, true facts, and whatever it is? It's very hard for people to make sense of the amount of information.
So one of the things I do is I do training in fact-checking. I've just been in Nigeria for 3 weeks doing it before their elections. And I think as much as journalists do it, we as journalists have a duty to educate the public about how to fact-check themselves. But I welcome this process because we journalists, we talk about transparency all the time. And I think that it's good that we have this kind of transparency, that we sit around the table and warts and all and we discuss it. Because this nonsense, because you don't like the story, you attack the journalist. We mustn't be distracted by that. And I think we've got to be more careful about what we report.
Sure.
Exactly what Mathatha said. Just because they said it doesn't make it news.
Well, I wonder what comes first, though, in newsrooms. Budgets or facts? Coming from the Sunday Times example, because many journalists complain and say we are under pressure, we are short-staffed. If you are going to do the fact-checking that Raymond is talking about, for instance, or deadline pressures as well that might lead to things slipping through and false information going out to the public.
Well, the Sunday Times is one of the money spinners in the media world within South Africa. So the budget was never really an issue itself. There may well have been other things. But the reason why people are in that newsroom, it's not to live to the budget. It's to produce facts to the best of their abilities as human beings. That's why even the Constitutional Court's ruling that if you believed it to be true at the time and it later proves to be wrong, you are still justified in having published it because you would have done everything in your power to convince yourself that this is true at that time. So facts are more important than the money, to come back to your question.
Chris, let's conclude. What do you hope to achieve with the probe?
Yeah, I just want to make a point quickly about the National Lotteries Commission before I answer your question. SANEF met with them today, and we will be liaising with them over the next few weeks, looking at different kinds of evidence that they're willing to produce to refute many of the claims that have been made. So we're hoping to have an open discussion with them and get to the bottom of what has been said, what hasn't been said, and what has been found on these machines. I think for me the most important part remains our readers and our audiences. You know, the media will always be here. These publications will always be here. We are just little cogs that come and go through this big machine that keeps turning without us. And I think that after this inquiry, I really hope that people trust the media again like they used to before the days of post-truth, Trump, etc., etc.
Sure.
And that we can actually put out a great product.
An unfair question, a 5-second question to you. If I'm a member of the public, Mathatha, who should I trust between a politician and a journalist? Who would you?
It's a no-brainer.
Exactly.
You trust the journalist.
Okay.
Really.
Well, he's a veteran journalist, should know. Trust the journalist more than a politician, he says. Raymond, thank you very much for having joined us from Cape Town. And Chris, it was a pleasure. And Mathatha Tsedu,
thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, ideally, we would have loved to have female colleagues on the program, but many of those that we approached were not available to be part of this discussion. But the issues are the same. Ultimately, I appreciate your time. Thank you. After the break, we will be celebrating the women who lifted the nation's mood, Banyana Banyana.